The scorching Texas sun was a hammer, and Sarah Miller was the anvil. She sat huddled in the dust of the Comanche camp. Her son Jacob clutched to her chest like the last prayer she had left. Her blouse was ripped, her skin was burned, and her mind was a wasteland of memories from 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since the raid. 3 weeks since she saw the life bleed out of her husband, Thomas, at the end of a warrior's lance. 3 weeks of being property, dragged across a wilderness that wanted her dead. Around her, the camp was a hive of motion. Women worked hides with stone scrapers, their arms slick with sweat and grease. Children, their faces painted with mock seriousness, chased each other between the buffalo skin teepees. Their laughter was a language from another world. Sarah kept her eyes on the ground. She'd learned that much, at least. Eye contact was an invitation for things she couldn't bear to imagine. Her captors mostly left her alone, giving her just enough water to wet her cracked lips, just enough scraps of meat to keep her milk from drying up, just enough to keep her and Jacob alive. But now, Jacob was whimpering. His tiny face, red and creased, turned against her breast. The whimpers grew into a thin, insistent cry that cut through the noise of the camp. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed at Sarah's heart. She glanced around, her eyes wide with fear. He was hungry, but feeding him out here, in the open, felt like a crime. With hands that shook so badly she could barely unfasten her torn blouse, she positioned Jacob to nurse. She tried to make herself small, invisible, a shadow in the blinding sun. "Hush now, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "We have to be quiet. Mama's here." His crying stopped as he latched on, his tiny fists kneading her skin. For just a second, Sarah closed her eyes. She could almost feel the gentle rock of the chair on their porch, almost smell the sweet scent of Thomas's tobacco pipe on the evening air. It was a ghost of a life she'd once had. And then a shadow fell over her. It was so sudden, so total, it blotted out the sun. Sarah's eyes snapped open. A man stood over her, an imposing figure whose presence seemed to suck all the air out of the afternoon. His face was a roadmap of hardship, carved by 50 summers on the plains. His eyes were dark, stern, and they were fixed on the nursing child at her breast. This was Chief Nakoa, the bear, the man who owned her life. Her heart began to beat like a war drum against her ribs. She instinctively curled her body around Jacob, a pathetic shield of flesh and bone against the coming storm. The chief had been away on a hunt when she was brought here. This was the first time she'd seen him up close. And she knew, with a certainty that froze her blood, that he was about to do something terrible. "Please," she breathed, the word getting lost in the dust. "Please don't hurt my baby." Chief Nakoa didn't move. He just watched, his expression as blank as a stone wall. He watched the white woman, his enemy, feeding her child. And in the depths of his hard eyes, something flickered. It wasn't pity. It was something else. Recognition. Memory. Without taking his eyes off them, he barked an order to a young woman nearby. The girl, maybe 16, scurried over, holding a water skin and a small bundle wrapped in hide. The chief gestured for the girl to give the items to Sarah. Sarah stared, uncomprehending. She didn't move, couldn't move. She was paralyzed by confusion and fear. Nakoa's patience wore thin. He knelt, his knees cracking, and spoke in broken, guttural English. "Child needs strength," he said, his voice like gravel. "Mother needs strength." Inside the bundle was dried bison meat and a handful of wild berries. It was more food than she'd seen in 3 weeks. It was a feast. Sarah looked up at the hard-faced chief, her mind reeling. Why? Why would the man who led the raid that killed her husband now offer her food? She had to ask. The words stumbled out of her. Why? His face remained a mask, but his voice carried a weight of sorrow that crossed any language barrier. "I too," he said, pointing a finger toward the endless horizon, "had wife, had son." His hand came to rest over his heart. "White soldiers come. No mercy." He looked from her to Jacob, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Nakoa knows heart pain of parent." And with that, He stood and walked away, leaving Sarah sitting in the dust, stunned into silence. The young woman who brought the food lingered for a moment. Her eyes were full of a cautious curiosity as she looked at Jacob. "I am Kimmy," she said, her English soft and hesitant. "I help you." That night, for the first time since her capture, Sarah slept with a full stomach. As Jacob breathed softly against her side, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in the darkness of her soul. But it was a dangerous hope, because as she drifted off, she couldn't shake the feeling that the chief's kindness wasn't a gift. It was a chain, one she didn't understand yet, and she wondered what this strange, new form of captivity would look like tomorrow. Outside her teepee, Chief Nakoa sat by the dying embers of the central fire. He wasn't thinking about the successful hunt or the coming winter. He was thinking of a ghost. 7 winters ago, smallpox, the white man's spotted death, had swept through his camp. It had taken his wife, Laughing Brook, and their 5-year-old son, Little Hawk. He had thought that part of his heart had been burned to ash with their bodies. But seeing the white woman, her eyes wild with fear, clutching her baby with that fierce, primal love, it had stirred the embers. He saw his wife in her defiance. He saw his son in the baby's innocent face. This wasn't compassion. It was a wound, torn open again. And he knew, with a warrior's cold certainty, that this woman and her child would bring either a great healing or a great destruction upon his people. The next morning, Sarah found a deerskin dress at the entrance of her teepee. It was soft, worn, and infinitely better than her own tattered rags. Kimmy was there, waiting. She helped Sarah into the dress and showed her how to use a cradle board, strapping Jacob securely to her back. It was a revelation. For the first time in weeks, Sarah had both her hands free. "Chief says you work," Kimmy explained, her tone matter-of-fact. She led Sarah to a group of women who were scraping fat from buffalo hides stretched on wooden frames. "Work good. Keeps mind from sadness." The work was brutal. Her hands, soft from a life of baking bread and tending a garden, were soon raw and blistered. The other women watched her with a mixture of contempt and indifference. They muttered to each other in their flowing language, and Sarah didn't need a translator to know they were talking about her. The white woman, the burden, the wife of a dead man their husbands had killed. But she gritted her teeth and worked. She scraped hides until her fingers bled. She gathered firewood until her back screamed. She learned the rhythms of the camp, the silent rules of a life she'd never asked for. And always, she felt his eyes on her. Chief Nakoa would watch from a distance. He'd observe her as she worked, as she cared for Jacob, as she tried to make herself invisible. His face never gave anything away. He was like a hawk circling high above, studying his prey. Or perhaps, a puzzle he was trying to solve. One day, a warrior with a cruel slash of a mouth and eyes like chips of obsidian strode up to where Sarah was working. His name was Kills the Crow. He spat on the ground near her feet. "The bear grows soft," he sneered in Comanche, but his tone was clear enough. He pointed a finger at Jacob, who was sleeping peacefully on the cradle board nearby. "This is a bad omen. A white snake in our camp. It will bite us." Before Sarah could react, Kimmy stepped between them. "He is just a child," Kills the Crow. "The chief has spoken. They are under his protection." The warrior's eyes narrowed with hatred. "The chief is a fool, blinded by a ghost. This woman and her whelp will be the death of us all." He stared at Sarah for a long moment, a silent promise of violence in his eyes, before turning and stalking away. Sarah's blood ran cold. The chief's protection had put a target on their backs. It wasn't just a chain, it was a cage, and now she realized there were other predators circling outside the bars. That night, she asked Kimmy about him. "Kills the Crow lost his family at Sand Creek," Kimmy explained in a low voice, making sure no one could overhear. "White soldiers killed them all. His heart is full of stones. He thinks Chief Nakoa's grief for his own son has made him weak." So, that was it. A power struggle. And she and Jacob were the pawns in the middle of a very dangerous game. The chief wasn't just being kind, he was making a statement. He was defying the anger in his own camp, an anger personified by Kills the Crow. And Sarah knew, with a terrifying clarity, that a man like Kills the Crow would not let that defiance stand for long. He was waiting for his moment to strike. 2 months crawled by. The brutal summer heat gave way to the crisp air of autumn. Sarah's skin was now the color of tanned leather, and her hands were covered in calluses. Jacob was thriving. He was crawling now, a chubby, gurgling force of nature who charmed the women of the tribe with his indiscriminate smiles. Even the hardest faces would soften when he babbled at them. He was their little pet, their curiosity, but not to Kills the Crow. He watched Jacob with a venomous glare, as if the baby's health was a personal insult. One morning, Sarah was down by the stream with the other women, washing hides. Jacob played on a blanket nearby, trying to catch a floating milkweed seed. Kimmy sat with her, helping her master the difficult scraping technique. "You think of running?" Kimmy asked suddenly, her voice low. The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She froze, her scraper still in her hand. She glanced around, but the other women were lost in their work, their rhythmic chatter filling the air. Running. The thought was a constant, tantalizing whisper in the back of her mind. But where would she go? I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. The homestead is gone. Thomas is gone. We're so far from any settlement. We wouldn't survive a day out there. Kimmy nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Good. Some try. The sun kills them. Or the wolves. Or other tribes. Her expression turned grave. Chief Nakoa has protected you. Kills the Crow wanted to sell you to the Mexican traders. They pay well for women with hair the color of the sun. A chill traced its way down Sarah's spine. A fate worse than death. She owed her life, and Jacob's, to the chief's strange, silent grief. And she was beginning to understand that her survival depended entirely on his whim. His protection was the only thing standing between her and men like Kills the Crow. Their conversation was cut short by a series of sharp cries from the camp. The women immediately stopped their work, their faces suddenly tense. They began gathering their things with a practiced urgency. Kimmy grabbed Jacob from the blanket and thrust him into Sarah's arms. "Riders coming," she said, her voice tight with alarm. "Go to your teepee. Stay inside. Stay quiet." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She clutched Jacob and ran, stumbling on the uneven ground, back towards the camp. Warriors were already mounting their horses, their faces grim. She ducked into the small teepee that had become her prison and her sanctuary, peeking through the flap. A group of about 20 riders was approaching. They weren't Comanche. Their horses were decorated differently, their faces painted in stark, aggressive patterns of red and black. Chief Nakoa stood in the center of the camp, his most loyal warriors flanking him. His face was an impassive mask. Kills the Crow stood slightly apart from the others, his arms crossed, a smug, watchful look on his face. The leader of the visiting party, a tall man with a brutal scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, dismounted. He walked towards Nakoa, his eyes sweeping the camp with an arrogant confidence. And then his gaze landed on Sarah's teepee. It lingered for a moment too long. She yanked the flap shut, her breath catching in her throat. She pressed Jacob's face into her shoulder, praying he wouldn't make a sound. Hours ticked by. The air outside was thick with the low rumble of male voices. Negotiations. Later that evening, Kimmy slipped into her teepee, her face pale in the flickering firelight. "They are Kiowa," she whispered. "They want allies for a raid against a new white settlement on the Brazos River." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "And they want to trade for you and Jacob. 10 horses and 12 new rifles." Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis. 10 horses and 12 rifles. That was their price. What did the chief say?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kimmy's eyes met hers. "He told them you are not for trade. He said, 'The woman and the child belong to the people now.'" But as Kimmy spoke, Sarah noticed something. A flicker of fear in the young girl's eyes that hadn't been there before. And she saw Kimmy glance nervously towards the teepee flap, as if afraid of being overheard. It was a small thing, but it was enough. Sarah realized Kimmy wasn't telling her the whole story. There was something more going on, something that terrified the girl. That night, sleep was impossible. Sarah sat at the entrance of her teepee, Jacob sleeping beside her, and watched the Kiowa campfires at the edge of their own. She saw silhouettes moving against the flames. She saw Chief Nakoa in council with his warriors, and she saw Kills the Crow slip away from the council fire. He moved like a shadow, melting into the darkness in the direction of the Kiowa camp. A sick feeling coiled in Sarah's stomach. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an auction. And someone from inside their own camp was trying to rig the sale. The next morning, the Kiowa prepared to leave. The scarred leader, whose name Sarah later learned was Tabe, mounted his horse. His dark eyes scanned the camp until they found her. He locked his gaze on her, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. It wasn't a look of disappointment. It was a look of promise. A promise that this was far from over. As the Kiowa rode away, kicking up clouds of dust, Sarah felt a presence behind her. It was Chief Nakoa. He was watching the departing riders, his expression grim. "They will return," he said. It wasn't a guess. It was a statement of fact. Finding a scrap of courage she didn't know she possessed, Sarah asked, "Why did you refuse? 10 horses and 12 rifles. It's a great price. Why keep us here?" For the first time, the chief turned and looked at her directly. The complexity in his eyes stole her breath. It was more than just grief. There was a fierce, protective fire there, but also a deep-seated weariness. "The boy," he said, nodding towards Jacob, who was awake now and curiously watching the departing riders. "He reminds me of my son. Same spirit. Same eyes that see everything." He paused, struggling for the English words. "And you. Strong mother. Like my wife. Fight to keep child safe." It was the most he had ever said to her. It was a glimpse into the wounded heart of the man who held her life in his hands. Before she could respond, his face hardened again, the mask slipping back into place. "Work now," he commanded gruffly. "Camp moves tomorrow. Winter comes. Need new hunting grounds, far from here." As he walked away, Sarah understood. They weren't just moving for better hunting. They were running. Nakoa was trying to outrun the Kiowa. He was trying to outrun the threat posed by Tabe. But what he didn't seem to realize was that he couldn't outrun the threat that was already inside his camp. Later that day, as Sarah helped the women dismantle the teepees, Kimmy worked beside her in a tense silence. The girl's hands were shaking. "What is it?" Sarah finally asked, her voice low. "What are you not telling me?" Kimmy's eyes darted around nervously. She pulled Sarah behind a stack of parfleche bags, out of earshot of the others. "Kills the Crow," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw him last night. He went to the Kiowa camp. He spoke with Tabe." The sick feeling in Sarah's stomach turned to ice. "What did he do?" "He told Tabe where we are making our winter camp. In the valley by the 3 forks of the river. He gave them our location. Betrayal. Cold. Calculated. Kills the Crow was so determined to see them gone, so convinced they were a curse, that he would lead their enemies right to them. He was willing to sacrifice his own people to get rid of a helpless woman and her baby." "Why?" Sarah breathed. "Why would he do that?" "He wants to be chief," Kimmy said, her eyes wide with fear. "He believes Nakoa is weak. If the Kiowa attack our winter camp, and Nakoa cannot protect us, if the white woman and her child are the cause of the bloodshed, the warriors will lose faith in him. They will turn to Kills the Crow." Sarah looked across the bustling camp. She saw Chief Nakoa, strong and resolute, directing his warriors. He was a great leader, a man of honor, trying to protect his people, and he was walking into a trap set not just by his enemies, but by one of his own. The world had turned upside down. Her captor was now her protector. The man who should have been her ally was now her deadliest enemy. And she was trapped in the middle, with a secret that could either save them all, or get her and her son killed. She had to tell Nakoa. But how? How could a white captive, a woman, accuse a respected warrior of treason. Who would believe her? Kills the Crow would deny it, and his followers would see it as a trick. Telling the chief could be a death sentence, but not telling him would be a death sentence for everyone. That night, as the camp slept uneasily before the long journey, Sarah held Jacob close and stared into the darkness. The stars seemed cold and distant, offering no answers. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The move to the winter grounds was a grueling 2-week trek across the plains. The air grew colder, the wind sharper. Sarah walked beside Kimmy, Jacob secure on her back, her mind a whirlwind of fear and indecision. Every time she saw Kills the Crow, he would meet her gaze with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, a silent warning to keep her mouth shut. She knew he suspected that Kimmy had seen him. He watched them both like a wolf stalking wounded deer. Several times she tried to approach Chief Nakoa, but he was always surrounded by his warriors, Kills the Crow often among them, making it impossible to speak to him alone. Her courage would fail her, and she would retreat, the secret festering inside her like a poison. They finally reached the valley of the Three Forks. It was sheltered, with a running stream and ample firewood, just as Kimmy had said. It should have felt safe. Instead, it felt like a cage. Every rustle of the leaves, every shadow cast by the setting sun, made Sarah jump. She knew Tabe and the Kiowa were out there, somewhere, watching, waiting, biding their time. Life in the winter camp settled into a routine. But it was a routine laced with tension. The hunts were less successful than they should have been. A strange sickness swept through the camp, weakening the children and the elders. Kills the Crow used every misfortune as a weapon. He would stand before the council fire and speak of the bad medicine the white woman had brought among them. He claimed the spirits of the land were angry, that the buffalo were hiding from the stench of the outsiders. More and more warriors began to listen to him. They looked at Sarah and Jacob not with indifference, but with open hostility. Chief Nakoa's authority was eroding, day by day. He defended her, his voice thundering through the camp that the woman and child were under his protection, that Comanche honor demanded it. But his words began to sound hollow against the backdrop of empty bellies and sick children. Sarah felt the noose tightening. She was becoming the lightning rod for all the tribe's fear and frustration. One evening, as a light snow began to fall, dusting the camp in a pristine white blanket, Chief Nakoa came to her teepee. He had just returned from a multi-day hunt, his face etched with weariness. The hunters had brought back only 2 deer, not nearly enough to feed the entire camp for long. He stood at the entrance, watching Jacob, who was now nearly 10 months old, and had just taken his first wobbly steps. "He grows strong," Nakoa said. It was his standard greeting, but tonight it sounded strained. "Good Comanche legs now." "We are grateful for the meat, Chief," Sarah replied, her voice soft. He surprised her by stepping inside, ducking under the flap and settling by her small fire. He seemed to need its warmth, its light against the growing darkness outside. He watched Jacob toddle towards him and offer up a small, smooth stone. Nakoa took the stone with a solemn gravity that made Jacob giggle. "He knows no fear," Nakoa murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Then the smile vanished. "Good for a warrior." Sarah's heart clenched. "Will we stay with the people always?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. His dark eyes found hers across the fire. "Where else would you go? The world outside these mountains is a dangerous place for a woman and child alone." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Here, you are protected. Jacob will learn the ways of the people. He will be my son." The declaration hung in the air between them. Not a question, a statement. He was claiming Jacob as his own, a public act of defiance against Kills the Crow and everything he stood for. Before Sarah could process the immense weight of his words, a shout erupted from the edge of the camp. It was followed by another, and then the chilling sound of a war cry. Nakoa was on his feet in an instant, the weary man gone, replaced by the warrior chief. His hand went to the knife at his belt as he burst from the teepee. Kimmy appeared at the entrance a second later, her face a mask of terror. "Kiowa!" she gasped. Many of them. They came from the trees. The trap had been sprung. Sarah snatched Jacob into her arms, her mind screaming. It was her fault. She had stayed silent. She had let her fear win, and now everyone was going to pay the price. "They come for us," she whispered, her voice choked with guilt and horror. Kimmy nodded, her eyes wide. She pressed a small, wickedly sharp, bone-handled knife into Sarah's hand. "Hide this. Kills the Crow is leading them to you." He pointed out your teepee. The ultimate betrayal. He hadn't just told them where to find the camp. He was actively helping them. The sounds of battle grew louder, the screams of men and women echoing through the valley. Sarah could hear Chief Nakoa's voice, a roar of command and fury, trying to rally his ambushed warriors. She grabbed Jacob's cradleboard and a small bag of dried food, her hands moving on pure instinct. She had to run. She had to get Jacob away. But it was too late. The teepee flap was ripped aside. It wasn't Kills the Crow. It was Tabe, the scarred Kiowa leader. His face was painted for war, his eyes burning with a triumphant cruelty. He smiled when he saw her. "The prize," he grunted in broken English, taking a step inside. Sarah scrambled backwards, holding Jacob behind her, the small knife clutched in her hand. It felt tiny, useless against this monster. But as Tabe lunged for her, another figure filled the doorway. It was Chief Nakoa. Blood was streaming from a deep gash on his shoulder, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, pure rage. "She is not yours to take, Tabe," Nakoa snarled. "She is the price for your weakness, old man." Tabe spat back, raising his war axe. "Kills the Crow will lead the Comanche now." He made a deal. The two chiefs clashed in the cramped space of the teepee, a whirlwind of flashing steel and savage grunts. Sarah curled into a tight ball around Jacob, shielding him from the brutal violence happening just feet away. A table was overturned, the fire scattered, sending sparks across the buffalo robes. The teepee filled with smoke. She heard a sickening crunch, a final, desperate gasp, and then a heavy thud as a body hit the ground. For a terrifying moment, there was silence. Then a voice cut through the smoke. "Come, we must leave now." It was Nakoa. He stood over Tabe's lifeless body, his chest heaving, his knife dripping with blood. Outside, the camp was a vision of hell. Teepees were burning, casting flickering demonic shadows. The fighting was fierce, chaotic. The Comanche were outnumbered, caught completely by surprise. Nakoa didn't even glance at his fallen rival. He grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her outside. He led her to where two horses were tethered, already loaded with supplies. He had prepared for this. He had known an attack was possible, even if he hadn't known about the betrayal. "Where is Kimmy?" Sarah cried, searching the chaos for her friend. "Getting others out. She knows the meeting place," Nakoa grunted, his face tight with pain from his shoulder wound. He lifted Sarah and Jacob onto one horse with surprising strength, then swung himself onto the other. "And Kills the Crow?" she yelled over the din of battle. Nakoa's eyes were like ice. "He will face Comanche justice if he lives through this night." Then they were riding, hard and fast, away from the burning camp, away from the screams, away from the nightmare of her own making. They galloped into the freezing darkness, the sounds of the massacre fading behind them. Jacob, amazingly, was silent, his small body pressed against hers. It was as if he understood that their lives depended on it. They rode until the moon was high in the sky, until the horses were lathered in sweat and Sarah's body was numb with cold. Nakoa finally led them to a hidden cave tucked into a rocky hillside. A handful of survivors were already there, a few women, some children, and Kimmy, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes blazing with defiance. She rushed to Sarah, helping her from the horse. "They came for you," Kimmy said, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and relief. "Kills the Crow sold us all for his ambition." Sarah looked at Chief Nakoa. He was leaning against the cave wall, his face pale, his wounded shoulder bleeding sluggishly. He had lost his camp, his people were scattered and dead, all because he had chosen to protect her. "He risked everything for us," she whispered. "Why?" Kimmy looked from Sarah to the chief, and her expression softened. He did not do it just for you. He did it for himself. He knows what kills the Crow and Tabe do not. That to surrender your honor, even for one person, is to surrender everything. It is a poison that kills a tribe from the inside out. She bounced Jacob gently in her arms. And because he sees his son's face when he looks at this one, to give him up would be like losing his own child all over again. As the night wore on, more survivors trickled in. The final count was devastating. Less than a third of the tribe had escaped. The rest were captured or dead. Their winter stores were gone. Most of their horses were stolen. And Kills the Crow was unaccountable for, having vanished during the raid with a handful of his followers. He had taken the stolen horses and left his people to die. Chief Nakoa, his face a grim mask of grief and fury, addressed the small, broken band of survivors. They would travel north, he told them, to the lands of his brother, Chief Iron Hand. But first, they would do the unthinkable. They would go back. They would track the Kiowa who had fled with the captives, 3 children and 2 young women from their tribe. He asks if you still have the knife, Kimmy whispered to Sarah. He says you may need it. Sarah's hand went to the bone handle still tucked in her dress. A fire she didn't know she possessed began to burn in her veins. This was her fault. Her silence had cost these people everything. She would not stand by and do nothing now. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Tell him I'm ready. For my son, and for these people, I will fight. That night, Sarah sat with Chief Nakoa at the mouth of the cave. They were keeping watch together, a silent, shared vigil. His shoulder had been bandaged, but she could see the pain in the tight set of his jaw. Thank you, she said, the 2 words carrying the weight of everything that had happened. He nodded once, his eyes fixed on the moonlit plains. After a long silence, he spoke. Kills the Crow will hunt us. He will join with the remaining Kiowa. They know we will come for our people. They will be waiting. He turned to her, his gaze intense. They will want you and the boy most of all. Tabe's death must be avenged. You are the prize that started the war. The thought of Jacob in the hands of those men sent a wave of icy determination through her. I won't let them take him. Nakoa studied her face in the pale moonlight. You have a warrior's heart now, he observed. Not the same woman who came to my camp crying. It was true. The terrified, grieving widow was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone forged in the fires of loss and survival. You taught me, she said. Your people taught me. He looked away, back towards the horizon. Tomorrow we hunt. We find our children. Then we go north. He paused, and his next words changed everything. You and Jacob, you are no longer captives. You fought beside us. You bled with us. You are people now. My people. It was an offer of belonging, forged in blood and fire. As Sarah sat beside the Comanche chief, she knew her old life was not just gone. It had been burned away. She was no longer Sarah Miller, the farmer's wife. She was someone new. Someone who belonged to this harsh, beautiful land and its fierce, broken people. And as they stared into the vast, dangerous darkness together, she knew she would die to protect them. At dawn, the small band prepared to move out. There were only 8 warriors left, including Nakoa. The rest were women, children, and a few old men. It was a fool's errand, a suicide mission. But as Sarah looked at the determined faces around the small fire, she saw no fear, only resolve. The Kiowa will be expecting warriors, Nakoa said, his voice low and raspy. They will not be expecting a woman with hair the color of the sun. He looked directly at Sarah. They will underestimate you, and that will be their final mistake. Sarah's breath caught. He wasn't telling her to stay behind. He was giving her a role in the fight to come. My husband, she said, the words feeling strange on her tongue after so long. He taught me how to shoot. I'm a good shot with a rifle. A flicker of surprise, then respect, showed in Nakoa's eyes. He nodded at one of his warriors, who handed Sarah a sleek, heavy rifle taken from a fallen Kiowa. The cold steel felt strangely familiar in her hands. You will ride with Kimmy, Nakoa commanded. Stay to the back, but be ready." They left the remaining women and children hidden in the cave under the care of an elder named Taza. As Sarah prepared to leave Jacob, a wave of pure terror washed over her. She kissed his soft cheek, breathing in his baby smell, memorizing his face. "Be good, my brave boy," she whispered. "Mama will be back." "He will be safe," Taza promised, her old, wrinkled face kind. "Go, bring our children home." They followed the Kiowa trail across the frozen plains. The tracks were easy to follow. There were too many of them, and they were slowed down by their captives and stolen horses. They were arrogant. They thought they had won. By mid-afternoon, the scouts returned. The Kiowa had made camp in a box canyon a few miles ahead. They had posted sentries, but they were lazy, confident that no one would dare follow them. Nakoa's plan was desperate and brilliant. He would take 6 of his warriors and create a diversion at the mouth of the canyon, a direct, suicidal charge to draw the main body of the Kiowa force. While they were distracted, the last warrior, a young man named Little Fox, would scale the steep canyon walls and free the captives. Sarah and Kimmy's job was the most critical. They were to find a high perch overlooking the canyon and provide covering fire. They were to be the guardians, the unseen angels of death. Their targets, any Kiowa who tried to harm the escaping children. From their position on the rocky ledge, Sarah could see the whole camp laid out below. The captive children were huddled together, tied by a single rope. The 2 young Comanche women were being tormented by a group of laughing Kiowa warriors. And there, in the center of it all, was Kills the Crow. He was talking with the new Kiowa war chief, a brutal-looking man who had clearly taken Tabe's place. Kills the Crow was smiling. He was pointing back in the direction they had come, likely telling them how easy it would be to hunt down the rest of Nakoa's pathetic survivors. The sight of his smiling face filled Sarah with a rage so pure and cold, it sharpened her senses. She rested the rifle on a rock, taking aim. This was the man who had murdered his own people. The man who would have sold her and her son. The man who had destroyed everything. "Not him," Kimmy whispered beside her, her voice tight. "Nakoa's justice. Not yours. Wait for the signal." The signal came moments later. A single piercing eagle cry from the mouth of the canyon. It was followed by the thunder of hooves and the defiant war cries of Nakoa and his warriors. The Kiowa camp exploded into chaos. Warriors scrambled for their weapons, shouting in surprise and confusion as Nakoa's tiny force slammed into their perimeter. It was a beautiful, terrible sight. 8 warriors charging against 40. In the confusion, Little Fox, who had climbed the far wall, dropped silently into the camp. He cut the ropes binding the children and urged them towards a fissure in the rock face. As they began to run, a Kiowa warrior saw them. He let out a yell and raised his rifle to shoot the fleeing children. "Now," Kimmy said. Sarah didn't need to be told. She had the warrior in her sights. She breathed out, just like Thomas had taught her, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Below, the Kiowa warrior crumpled to the ground. A second warrior turned towards the children. Kimmy's rifle cracked and he fell. They worked in perfect, deadly unison. A rhythm of death from above. Below, the battle was a maelstrom. Nakoa was a force of nature, his knife and tomahawk a blur, his wounded shoulder forgotten. He fought with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. One by one, his warriors fell. Suddenly, a movement from below caught Sarah's eye. It was Kills the Crow. He wasn't fighting. He was slipping away from the battle, climbing the canyon wall, directly towards them. He had seen the rifle fire, he knew who was up there, and he was coming to silence them. "Kimmy! He's coming!" Sarah yelled, reloading her rifle. Kimmy glanced down, her face going pale. "There's no time. Get the children out. I will hold him off." "No!" But Kimmy was already moving, drawing her knife and positioning herself at the narrowest point of the ledge. "Go, Sarah, protect the children. That is all that matters." Sarah hesitated for a heart-stopping second. Then she saw the last of the freed captives scrambling up the rock face towards her. She had to lead them to safety. She had to get back to Jacob. With a final, agonized look at Kimmy, she turned and began herding the terrified children and women along the treacherous ledge, away from the sounds of the battle. Behind her, she heard a guttural yell as Kills the Crow reached the top, followed by the sharp, defiant cry of Kimmy as they clashed. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She just kept moving, herding her small flock of survivors through the rocks, her heart breaking with every step. She had led them away from the fight, deeper into the maze of rocks and shadows at the back of the canyon. The children were crying. The two young women were half paralyzed with fear. She found a small, defensible alcove and pushed them inside. "Stay here. Do not make a sound," she commanded, her voice harsh with desperation. She had to go back. She had to help Kimmy. She had to help Nakoa. Leaving the rifle with one of the young women, she said, "If anyone but me comes, shoot them." She crept back along the ledge, the bone-handled knife feeling small and cold in her hand. The sounds of the main battle were fading. It couldn't have lasted long. Nakoa and his warriors were either dead or captured, but she could hear the scrape of boots on rock nearby, the grunts of a struggle. She rounded a sharp bend and saw them. Kimmy was on the ground, blood flowing from a cut on her arm. Kills the Crow stood over her, his face a mask of rage, his knife raised for the killing blow. "You should have stayed with the other women, girl," he snarled. "Now you die with the White Witch's curse on you." Sarah didn't think. She screamed, a raw animal sound of fury and grief, and launched herself off the rock wall, slamming into Kills the Crow's back. The impact sent them both sprawling. His knife flew from his hand, skittering across the stone. He rolled, coming up with a roar, his powerful hands closing around her throat. His thumbs pressed down, cutting off her air. Black spots danced in front of her eyes. She clawed at his face, but he was too strong. She was dying. And her last thought was of Jacob. Then, a shadow fell over them. Kills the Crow's eyes widened in shock. His grip loosened just enough for Sarah to gasp for air. A figure stood silhouetted against the sky. It was Chief Nakoa. He was covered in blood, his own and that of his enemies. He held a Kiowa war axe in one hand. He looked like a spirit of vengeance. "Traitor!" Nakoa's voice was a low, deadly rumble. Kills the Crow shoved Sarah aside and scrambled for his knife. He never made it. Nakoa moved with a speed that was terrifying. The war axe swung once. It was over. Nakoa stood over the body of the man who had destroyed his people, his chest heaving. He looked not in triumph, but in profound, soul-deep weariness. "The others?" Sarah croaked, her throat raw. "Gone," Nakoa said. "They fought like lions. They bought the children's freedom with their lives." He walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down. The battle was over. The surviving Kiowa were gathering their dead. They had won the battle, but Nakoa's desperate gamble had won the war. They had their children back. They found Kimmy, her wound deep but not fatal. Together, the three of them, the old chief, the young woman, and the white mother, gathered their rescued children and slipped away into the wilderness as darkness fell, leaving the Kiowa to their hollow victory. The journey north was a long, silent funeral march. They were a ghost tribe, just a handful of women and children led by a wounded chief. But they were alive, and they were free. They traveled for weeks, through snow and biting wind, surviving on what little game Nakoa could hunt. Sarah's rifle became their lifeline. Her skill at hunting earned her a new level of respect from the women. She was no longer the outsider. She was the provider, the protector. Brave mother, they called her. Finally, they saw it. A large Comanche encampment nestled in a winter valley. The camp of Chief Iron Hand, Nakoa's brother. As they approached, warriors rode out to meet them, their faces hard and suspicious. But when they saw Nakoa, they lowered their weapons. Iron Hand, a man even larger and more imposing than his brother, came forward. The two chiefs embraced, a silent greeting that spoke volumes of shared grief and respect. That night, Nakoa told the story around the great council fire. He spoke of the raid, of the betrayal of Kills the Crow, of the desperate battle in the canyon. He spoke of the bravery of his fallen warriors. And then he looked at Sarah. "We survived because of this woman," he said, his voice ringing with authority. She fought as a warrior. She bled for the people. She and her son are no longer captives. They are Comanche. She is brave mother. Her son Jacob is my son. He will be called Little Hawk, in memory of the son I lost. A murmur went through the assembled tribe. To adopt a white child, to give him the name of his own dead son, was an act of immense significance. Iron Hand stood and placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "What is ours is yours, brother," he declared. "Your people are our people. We are one." Sarah's life found a new rhythm in the bustling winter camp. She was no longer a slave, no longer a captive. She was a respected member of the tribe, the adopted sister of the chief's niece, the mother of the chief's adopted son. She learned the language, the customs, the stories. The hole in her heart left by Thomas's death would never fully heal, but it was no longer a gaping wound. It was a scar, a reminder of a life she had loved, a part of the story that had brought her here. Years passed. Little Hawk grew, a boy of two worlds. He had his mother's blue eyes and fair hair, but he had the spirit of a Comanche. He learned to ride before he could walk properly, to shoot a small bow with uncanny accuracy. He was loved by all, a symbol of the strange, unexpected peace that had been forged in the crucible of violence. Sarah watched him, her heart filled with a fierce, protective love. She had found a home in the most unlikely of places. She had found a family. One day, a group of white traders came to the camp. They brought news of the world outside. The war between the North and South was over. The railroads were pushing west. The world was changing. The head trader, a kind-faced man, saw Sarah and her son. He saw the blue eyes, the fair hair. He offered to take them back, to return them to civilization. "You don't belong here," he said gently. That night, Sarah sat with Nakoa by the fire. He was an old man now, his hair streaked with gray, his movements slow. "The trader offered to take us back," she said. Nakoa nodded. He had seen. He had known this day would come. "The path is open," he said, his voice soft. "Your son should know the world of his father, as well as the world of his mother." Sarah looked at Little Hawk, who was sleeping peacefully, his head in her lap. She looked at the circle of teepees, the glowing embers of the fire, the vast, star-filled sky above. This was her home. These were her people. But the trader was right. Jacob deserved to know both sides of his heritage. He was a bridge between two worlds that were so often at war. "We will go," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "But we will return. This is our home. We will always return." The parting was wrenching. Kimmy wept openly. The whole tribe came to see them off. Nakoa stood tall, his face a stoic mask, but Sarah saw the deep pain in his eyes. He placed a hand on Little Hawk's head. "Go, my son," he said. "Learn the ways of the white man, but do not forget the ways of the people. Your heart is Comanche." He then turned to Sarah, and for the first time, he placed his hand on her shoulder. "Go, brave mother. Walk in peace." The journey back was a strange dream. The world of towns and fences and iron horses felt alien, loud, and crowded. Sarah found work in a small frontier town, sewing and cleaning. She sent Jacob to the mission school. He was smart and learned quickly. But every evening he would ask her to tell him the stories of the Comanche, of the great chief Nakoa, of his Aunt Kimmy. She kept their memory alive for him, a sacred fire in their small, lonely room. 2 years after they left, a rider came to town, a Comanche warrior. He found Sarah at the laundry where she worked. He carried a message. Chief Nakoa was dying. He was asking for his son. Without a second thought, Sarah packed their few belongings, bought 2 horses, and they rode. They rode back into the heart of the plains, back to the world she had left behind. They found the camp weak and impoverished. The buffalo were disappearing. The white settlers were encroaching. Nakoa was a shadow of his former self, lying on a buffalo robe in his teepee. But when he saw Little Hawk, his eyes lit up. He reached out a trembling hand. "My son," he whispered. They stayed through his final days. Jacob, now a young boy, sat by his adopted father's side, listening to his last words of wisdom. When Nakoa died, the entire tribe mourned. They buried him on a high bluff overlooking the plains he had loved and defended his whole life. Iron Hand was now the chief of all the people, but he was old too. The future of the tribe looked bleak. One evening, as the council debated what to do, a young Jacob, Little Hawk, walked into the circle of elders. He was just a boy, but he stood tall, and his voice was clear and strong. "I have seen the white man's world," he said in perfect Comanche. "I have learned their language, I have read their books, and I have seen their weakness. They are divided, they fight among themselves, but I have also seen their strength. They have numbers, they have technology. We cannot fight them with arrows and lances anymore." He paused, his blue eyes sweeping over the faces of the hardened warriors. "But we have something they do not. We know this land. We are a part of it. My father, Chief Nakoa, taught me that a true warrior fights with his heart, but also with his mind. I will go to the white man's fort, not as a warrior, but as a negotiator. I will speak for the people. I will use their own laws, their own words, to protect our land, to protect our way of life." A stunned silence fell over the council. Then, Chief Iron Hand stood up. He walked to the boy and placed his hands on his shoulders. "Nakoa's son has spoken," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He has the heart of a Comanche and the mind of a white man. He is our future. He is the bridge." And so he was. Jacob, known to his people as Little Hawk, became one of the greatest diplomats and advocates for his adopted tribe. He negotiated treaties, fought for their rights in the white man's courts, and helped them adapt to a changing world without losing their identity. Sarah stood by his side, a proud mother watching her son fulfill a destiny she could never have imagined. She had been captured, enslaved, and nearly killed. But through it all, she had survived. She had protected her son. And in the end, she had helped save a people. She had found her purpose not in the life she had lost, but in the one she had been forced to build. A life of courage, of love, and of belonging, under the vast, unforgiving sky of the Texas plains. If you were moved by Sarah's incredible journey of survival and the unbreakable bond she forged with a people who were once her enemies, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. And let us know in the comments below what part of her story resonated with you the most. We can't wait to read your thoughts. Thanks for watching.